But stay tuned for part 3, because there's gonna be a part 3. There's a new EMG pickup coming soon. They're Bartolini-sized pickups, and according to what I've been told, they are unlike anything EMG has released up to this point. So once those pickups get here, they're going in here, and hopefully they sound good enough to stay. And by good enough, I mean true enough, not so dramatically different like this, that it can still be passable as a Rick despite having some different seasoning on it. So to bring you up to speed, this is my 2003 Rick 4003 or 4003 or however you want to say it. I got this a couple years ago, and it's seen a couple different EMG modifications to it. The first one, of course, was the passive M80 mini humbuckers that are relatively, give or take, more or less the same size and shape as the original Rick pickups. Version 2 saw the Thunderbird pickup in the neck with the Jazz pickup in the bridge. Now within that video we had a couple different models of that TB cap. There's a J, a P, and then a DC dual coil. And now here we are with the brand new E4W pickups with pretty much all the same stuff going on down here. But let's talk a little bit about where the Rick stands and how these pickups sound. So if you're unfamiliar with the E4W, these are essentially Bartolini-sized pickups. I know there's an official name for that size, but Bartolinis, certain Aguilars, certain Nordstrands, a lot of Ibanez bases have this particular size and shape of pickup that the traditional EMG 35 or even a Thunderbird pickup or whatever does not fit into, whereas obviously these will. If you haven't seen the original E4W demo video that I did recently, these are wide aperture single coils. So they are single coils, but they're a little thicker sounding than your typical J bass, but not quite as thick as a dual coil humbucker soap bar. And to get them into the Rick, first of all, I had to buy a new pickguard. And again, I'm doing this all by hand, so the route is not perfect, but from a distance, you can't really tell some of my uneven lines. And then the bridge pickup almost perfectly fit inside this with no modifications. I had to just remove a little bit of material from the sides on this metal plate. But in terms of the routing underneath, there's plenty of room for these pickups to fit in there. So what are the advantages that these pickups give over any of the previous mods or the stock? I can't tell you how many times I've heard the sentiment of, why would you buy XYZ if you don't like what XYZ does? And I think we all have different answers to that. I'm a fan of modding, I'm a fan of EMG, but more importantly than either of those two things, I think I'm just a fan of challenging the status quo. So as soon as you tell me I can't or shouldn't do something, it only fuels my fire to want to do it more. But all that aside, there are a few things about these models in this bass that I prefer over any of the previous iterations so far. The first and most obvious being that they're active EMG pickups, and I just like that sound and what they do, and I know what to expect from them. So moving on from that, I think honestly the biggest advantage that I like on this setup is the size of these pickups provide a very comfortable thumb rest, a very comfortable, easy place to put your thumb that the stock pickups don't really offer. But beyond that, even the mini hums that I had custom made for this originally a couple years ago, it just didn't feel comfortable to rest your thumb anywhere on those pickups. Now, again, if you're playing with a pick, not really an issue, but as soon as you want to rest a thumb, those pickups were really uncomfortable. Not to mention, they weren't exactly wide enough for the string spacing on this bass, so playing fingerstyle and pulling the E up that way, you would lose a little bit of the volume in the output because it would fall a little bit outside of that magnetic field. So naturally, as you can see, the size of these pickups, we don't have an issue with magnetic field. They fit in there very nicely, they're very comfortable, but the advantage that you have of having two of the same pickup versus a single coil and a DC like we did previously is that there's a, I don't know what word to use, I guess for lack of a better word, I'll go with phase cancellation, or at the very least the interplay between the two pickups, particularly in the middle position. In my opinion, it sounds better when those pickups are matched, in this bass at least, because obviously there is a plethora of basses that have utilized a PJ configuration that sound incredible in their own right, but at least in this bass, I have found that when both pickups are identical, it just sounds better in the middle position. Now, the thing that makes these pickups unique unto the EMG line, and really kind of in the grand scheme of bass pickups, is these are wide aperture single coil pickups. Now, up to this point, we've had jazz bass pickups on one end of the spectrum, J bass pickups, right? And on the other end, we've had soap bar, humbucker, dual coil, synonyms, you know, EMG 35 and Music Man stuff and Thunderbirds and big, thick, fat pickups. And now, of course, a lot of those differences in tone come down to the physical construction, right? I mean, there's less material in a jazz bass pickup than there is in a dual coil pickup. There's usually twice as much material in a dual coil. But generally speaking, outside of the material is the aperture of the pickup. Now, the jazz bass, physically smaller, the magnet therein, smaller still. Now, in the case of EMG, it's usually a bar magnet. In the more traditional Fender stuff, it's the little individual pole pieces. But the point is that that smaller magnet senses a smaller portion of the string vibrating directly above it. Now, in the case of the dual coil, humbucker, soap bar, Thunderbird, Music Man, etc., yes, there are two coils in it, which is going to impart its own thing inherently. But generally speaking, because you have two magnets within a bigger housing, it's sensing a larger portion of the string, which is going to give it its own unique tone. And generally speaking, larger aperture magnets are going to be warmer, thicker, maybe a little less defined, whereas the smaller aperture pickups are going to be brighter, more articulate, and sometimes a little thinner. And that's where these come in. These kind of fall right in the middle of those two things. I've kind of been likening it sort of like the P90 of bass, right? To where in the guitar world, in the traditional guitar world, you've got Strat single coil on one end of the spectrum, and you've got fire-breathing humbucker on the other end of the spectrum. And the P90 kind of falls right in the middle. It's a bigger magnet, it's a single coil, it's got more winds, there's a lot of physical construction that goes into the tonal differences, but again, wider aperture. Now, this isn't a P90 necessarily, but it's similar to a P90 in its relation to big, dark, woolly humbucker and super bright, articulate single coil. So these are single coils, but you'll see that the magnet in it is quite large, which is giving you a wider aperture. It's sensing more of the string, giving you kind of the articulation you want from a single coil, but a little bit more warmth and depth that you would get from a DC dual coil, humbucker, soap bar, etc. And then outside of the wider aperture, it is an active 9-volt powered, low impedance, kind of typical EMG sauce going on in here. So if you do like that active EMG sauce and what that has to offer, it's still present despite its uniqueness and newness in terms of its construction. And looking closely at the logo color, you'll see that it's silver, which in the EMG world indicates ceramic magnet, whereas gold would indicate Alnico, and a darker gray, I don't really know how to classify that color, would indicate ceramic steel. So to sum it up in one sentence, these are active ceramic wide aperture single coil pickups. Now in terms of the rest of the electronics, everything after the pickups pretty much remains unchanged from the last time we met and talked about this bass, where it's a 3-way pickup selector, 2 volumes, and 2-band EQ, bass and treble. Only 1 output jack is active, and up to this point, without routing, there is no room under the pickguard for a 9-volt battery, let alone 2 9-volt batteries, which is why I'm using this again. This is the EMG ES918. This is a pedal-sized power supply. You can fit 2 9-volt batteries in there and choose 9 or 18-volt operation. There is also an AC adapter. It's not recommended because it may or may not be noiseless. You might introduce some kind of electrical hum in there. But basically, using a stereo TRS cable from your bass to this, you can power anything on board, whether it's pickups, EQ, what have you, that would otherwise need a 9 or 18-volt battery. You can power with this without having to route your instrument. Now, I've gotten questions. Does it only work with EMG? No. It doesn't matter what brand of what you have in there. You've got a John East EQ, an Aguilar Dark Glass, whatever. This will power anything that you would otherwise use batteries for. And like the previous video, it's pretty much set to 18 volts all the time. When you're running particularly EQ on a bass that has bass, you know, the low knob, highly advantageous, if not necessary, to run 18 volt. So in terms of this Rick and the series of mods that it has had done to it, this may or may not be the final one. I'm going to kick around some ideas. I do like the way this sounds. I like the way they feel. And honestly, I mean, I like the way they look. They look good in it. That being said, I'm not 100% sure I want to commit to a 9-volt powered low impedance active pickup in here. Not that I dislike them. I've done videos and I've talked endlessly about how I think that technology is superior to the old school stuff, objectively speaking. But where we jump into subjective territory is that the passive sound, the high impedance, more traditional construction pickup, has become more expected at this point. And again, as someone who does demos for other stuff and you need basses, it's more advantageous for me sometimes to kind of go with the more traditional expected sound. So my hypothesis as it sits right now is the final iteration of this bass will be 2 passive EMG, probably Alnico, if not ceramic steel. We'll figure those details out when we get there. Point being, 2 passive jazz pickups. And the reason that I'm going to go with the jazz pickup specifically is because it's going to give me a lot of what I like about the width of this housing, where the thumb is just, it's comfortable to rest your thumb on it, is basically what I'm trying to say. So that is one advantage. The jazz bass, passive jazz bass, really isn't that much different in terms of how it sounds to the stock Rick stuff. Now, I mean, again, we can argue this until the sun goes down, but generally speaking, you know, a lot of the tone of this bass comes from the pickup placement and the construction and all of that stuff, where the pickups themselves are just one part of the ingredient. And what I have found, again, I haven't been able to test this hands-on yet, but based on what I've seen looking around the internet, the passive EMG JHZ does not sound dramatically different from the original Rick pickup. Now, again, it's different enough to where I'm going to like it better in terms of the way I know it's going to respond to my attack and the way it's going to record and the way it's going to be noiseless and all of that sort of stuff. But from a more obvious, noticeable, measurable kind of EQ output thing, it's not wildly different. So my hypothesis as we sit right now is that The final version of this is going to be 2 passive jazz pickups, and I may still hang on to the EQ because that's just fun. But anyway, thanks for hanging out and checking out the current iteration of the Rick Mod series and where it stands today. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you didn't, thanks anyway for the view, and give the video a like or a dislike depending on your opinion. And I think, in the words of Forrest Gump, that's about all I have to say about that. So until next time, be safe, and I'll see you later.